Good morning. With the dagger, bring it up, turn flat, south to north, and with the hilt, east to west. Then turn it blade east to west, hilt north to south, and voila, she dead. I'm just waiting for you to make the first move. I'm just saying, swing and don't regret the aim. I'm not playing games. I'm wanting to see you do this. I am wanting you to kill her. You have to end your suffering by ending her joy. These are just some of the texts and messages that Isaac Apodaca sent his girlfriend, Kiara McCulley, over a multi-hour period from October 28th of 2022 through the next day about a plot to murder Grace Jennings. Grace didn't know that the person that she trusted, Isaac Apodaca, to house her, her cats, and her belongings for a night, was helping plan her murder. By 1:30 in the afternoon on October 29th, just 14 hours after she had arrived at the garage residence occupied by Kiara and Isaac, Grace was dead. She was brutally stabbed and sliced using a sword. She had piercing injuries throughout her body, both ones that caused her death and ones that occurred after her death. 19-year-old Kiara McCulley is the one that swung that sword and stabbed Grace. But Isaac Apodaca helped, and he encouraged Kiara every single step of the way until Kiara took Grace's life. This trial is not about whether it was Kiara or whether it was Isaac that killed Grace Jennings. It is about all of the effort that Isaac Apodaca undertook to make it happen. This case is about Isaac's relationship with Kiara and the toxic dynamics that he used to punish, push, cajole Kiara to do his bidding. This case is about manipulation that was long-standing and coercive control. The evidence in this case will show that Isaac is the architect of Grace's murder. So by way of background, Kiara, Isaac, and Grace all knew each other. Kiara and Grace had grown up around one another, and according to Kiara, they dated as young teens. It was a volatile dynamic by the end, and Grace and Kiara weren't really supposed to be around each other. Grace was not allowed at Kiara's house, and they were not friendly with one another. Isaac asserts that he and Grace later dated after they met on Snapchat, a social media platform, and according to Isaac, they subsequently broke up, but they remained friendly. One day at the Santa Fe Place Mall, Kiara ran into Grace and Isaac, and that's how she met. Kiara met Isaac. And subsequently, she and Isaac started dating, and they remained more or less together despite fights that went both ways and dramatic breakups and reunifications. As Kiara's time in her multi-year relationship with Isaac went on, you will learn that Kiara grew to believe the increasingly bizarre stories that Isaac would tell her, including that he, Isaac, had seen video footage of Kiara being gang raped and Grace accepting money for it. This allegedly occurred when Grace and Kiara were both teens. Now, Kiara has always been odd, and the evidence may reflect that she's pretty gullible. And this increased as time went on with Isaac and their power dynamics shifting and evolving into one where she would continuously make choices contrary to her health and to her safety. Choices that were not rational, choices that are against her self-interest, choices that an average person would choose not to make. For example, you will hear evidence that 6 months prior to the murder in April of 2022, Isaac beat up Kiara, breaking her thumb after hulking out. And Kiara cooperated with the police in a case, but later backed off and chose not to do so. When Isaac suggested that Kiara prostitute herself, she did so, with Isaac keeping the money. She even went back to sex work at his behest after Kiara, was raped by a John that had hired her. This evidence will be offered for a very limited purpose, and it will be offered to show Isaac's knowledge that he could manipulate Kiara, his intent to manipulate her on the day of the murder, and for the coercive dynamic between the two of them. You will see that when Kiara was told that Isaac was part of a secret vigilante organization called Ghost that was created for the purpose of killing sex traffickers, she believed Isaac, that he had started this secret vigilante organization. She believed him when he told her that if Kiara, killed Grace, who was on a kill list chosen specifically for Kiara, that she would move up the ranks and have perks in the black market. That's a statement from one of the messages between Isaac and Kiara. That statement was made during the night of the plot of Grace's murder. There will be no evidence in this case that Ghost is a real group or that Isaac was in fact a secret vigilante killer with access to a barn for killing people, but she believed him when he told her so. Kiara begins to believe Isaac when he convinces her that she has multiple personalities or dissociative identity disorder, helping her to name the different personalities and playing into their existence. So at this point, you may be sitting there thinking, wow, those are some bold claims. Where on earth is all of that evidence going to come from? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be from a variety of sources. It'll be in the form of civilian testimony, who will take the stand and take the same oath as every other category of witness, forensic expert witnesses, such as fingerprints and DNA analysts, and a pathologist who performed Grace's autopsy. It'll be in the form of law enforcement testimony. It'll be in the form of data points from cell phones and Facebook search warrants. It'll be in the form of testimony from Kiara and a forensic psychiatrist named Dr. Michael Wellner. So now that you have some background, maybe it's a good time for me to go ahead and kind of put all this upcoming evidence into a roadmap and a timeline for you. I'll try to generally refer to the witnesses more or less in the order that they'll appear in the trial, starting later this morning. So as to the timeline that the evidence will establish, October 28th of 2022, Grace Jennings needed a place to stay, and she reached out via Instagram, another social media platform, to Isaac Apodaca, who agreed to let her come over. Now, despite knowing that Kiara hated Grace, and that Kiara did not want Grace there, he allowed it. Grace arrived at 5941 Jaguar Drive, the house owned by Kiara's mom, Lanny McCulley, around 11:30 p.m. Lanny remained in her house, which is the main part of the property, the main house is what we'll call it during the trial. She didn't have any idea that Grace was on the property. And the plan between Isaac and Kiara initially that night was for him to then bring Grace to a nearby park where Kiara was dressed up in scary clothes and carrying her sword. We know these things, again, because of the messages between Kiara and Isaac. But he did not, in fact, bring Grace to the park. They instead went to the single-room detached garage in the back part of the property, where Kiara and Isaac mostly stayed. Eventually, Kiara left the park, and she entered the garage. Everyone was present. Everything was relatively calm. And after a while, Isaac left. He went to the main house. Kiara and Grace talked. He returned. And for the rest of the night and the morning, Isaac and Kiara messaged each other with very few breaks, each using their own cell phones. And some of it's innocuous emojis and stickers and cartoons, but much of it centers on killing Grace. At times, Kiara actively participates. She asks Isaac to be the one to kill Grace. They message about how they will clean up afterward, using hydrogen peroxide or what they'll throw away or put in the laundry. They discuss using the dagger versus the sword. But Isaac, when asked to do it, will deflect, but he repeatedly encourages her to commit the murder throughout. You'll see that they often use their pet names for each other. Kiara was Puggle, Isaac was called Otter. Throughout the night, all three of them lay in the same bed to sleep, with Isaac across the foot of the bed. You'll see a picture of that from the messages. In the early to mid-morning, they concoct a plan, Kiara and Isaac, while Grace is sleeping, presumably, that Isaac calls Operation Fake Kickout, where he tells Grace that they both have to leave. This was not a real kickout. Operation Fake Kickout is commencing. He is setting up the opportunity for Kiara to kill Grace. So as that's about to commence, Isaac sends the final psychological blow of a message to Kiara to push Kiara to kill Grace. He again tells Kiara that Grace has previously confessed to it being the delusional gang rape that he's claimed that Grace facilitated years prior. These final messages are sent at 1:27 in the afternoon. At this point, Kiara has summoned enough rage. Isaac knows that he plans to use the sword that is present in the garage, and he goes into the house briefly, stopping to help Lanny McCulley put a rug in the washing machine and to urinate. When he returns, Kiara has the sword. Grace is dead or dying on the bed. He tells Kiara to go shower. She does. So Kiara goes into the main house to shower, saying hello to her mom. She removes the clothes that she'd been wearing during the murder and puts them in the laundry hamper. After showering and changing, she goes back to the garage. She finds Grace's body in a different position than she left it, and Isaac is gone. She didn't know that after Googling how to dispose of a body, that Isaac had instead left. He called his mom, Linda Montoya, and went to AP Wireless, a cell phone store down the street. Linda called 911 at 1:46 p.m., triggering a police response. You will hear portions of that 911 call as the first bit of evidence this morning. Within about 6 minutes of Linda calling 911, at about 1:52 in the afternoon, the initial responding officers arrive. Santa Fe Police Department officers Francisco Alvarado, Alejandro Arroyo, and Manuel Romero are arriving at the house and approaching the property regarding the reports of a stabbing homicide. You'll see as Alvarado approaches the side fence, he sees Kiara go from the garage back to the main house, and he yells, "Contact, contact," meaning that he sees a person. He follows. She shuts the door into the main house. Alvarado notices blood on that back door and begins to kick it in. Lanny and Kiara exit the residence, and they are detained. Now, a brief period of confusion kind of sets in about whether police had even responded to the right place. Could this have been a prank? Because everything is so calm. But that's when Alejandro Arroyo confirms the address and finds out that the body is allegedly in the garage. He uses Lanny's keys to open the garage door and sees Grace's body. She is visibly dead. She's on the floor directly in front of the door, slumped against the edge of the mattress. Emergency medical responders arrive and they confirm her death using EKG leads. So while those three officers, Arroyo, Alvarado, and Romero, secure that scene, Santa Fe Police Department officers Cesar Ornales and Derek Arn are responding to AP Wireless. There, they detain Isaac Apodaca. They Mirandize him. They tell him he has the right to remain silent. Anything he says can be used against him. Anyone who's watched a Law and Order episode or two knows their Miranda rights. He gets a statement from Isaac, and then he and his colleague take steps to secure the cell phone that Isaac has in his hand and on his person. Shortly thereafter, Violent Crimes Unit Detective, who's now a sergeant, Javier Vigil, is assigned the case, as there has obviously been a homicide that necessitates an investigating detective. He first goes to the house on Jaguar. He gets briefed, looks around, and then leaves to go to the station to interview Isaac and Kiara, who have been transported there. During all of this, search warrants are initiated and the scene is secured and set up to be processed. And when I say scene, I mostly mean the garage, the place where Grace died. Now, I've mentioned the physical or the digital evidence, the messages in the case, but as I've kind of hinted, the digital evidence won't stand alone. It's corroborated by a lot of the physical evidence that you'll hear about next. The scene is processed, that's the word for searched, by crime scene technician Maria Tenna. She is a trained member of law enforcement who collects and photographs evidence. Excuse me. She will help us answer the question of what happened in that garage. Through Officer Tenna, you will see pictures of the garage both before and after Grace's body is removed for autopsy. You will see that the garage is small, with much of the room taken up by a mattress and a couple small pieces of furniture. And that other than the items that have evidentiary value, the garage is full of trash, urine bottles, multiple cats, and several bags and boxes of Grace's belongings that she had brought with her. Officer Tenna photographs the scene as different items of evidentiary value are kind of removed, and the scene is processed almost kind of layer by layer. Of the items that she collects, which there were many, some of the most important are the large, bloody, double-handed broadsword. It has a 36-inch blade and is the murder weapon in this case. She collects Grace's cell phone, some bloody bedding that demonstrates that the murder seems to have mostly taken place on top of the bed. She collects Kiara McCulley's cell phone, which was located under Grace's body on the floor in the blood. A dagger that was not used in the murder itself, but was one of the items that Isaac and Kiara contemplated using. With Isaac at one point urging Kiara to use the dagger because it's blunt and would cut better. Officer Tina's testimony will, in essence, show us how those messages that were sent between Isaac and Kiara foreshadowed what actually then took place in the crime scene. Now, what is not present in this case is evidence of the use of hard drugs. There's no meth, no crack, no PCP or bath salts, or any paraphernalia associated with the use of hard drugs. The evidence will be that the only substances present on scene was alcohol and marijuana, and that neither of those appears to have been heavily used, if used at all. Also know that there will be no evidence in this case of sexual activity between Isaac, Kiara, and Grace. This is not some sort of polyamorous love triangle. There's no evidence of a threesome that night. When we say people were in the bed, we mean for purposes of texting and sleeping. I want to talk to you now about the three forensic experts that you will hear from regarding Grace's body and the sword. Dr. Emily Helmrich is a forensic pathologist at the Office of the Medical Investigator. She conducted Grace's autopsy and will testify about the many injuries to Grace's body, including the injuries that pierced vital organs, such as her liver and lungs, injuries that left Grace nearly decapitated. She will put in context whether which injuries were fatal, which injuries occurred close to or even after death. And unsurprisingly, the evidence will be that Grace died of sharp force injuries and that the manner of death is a homicide. Two individuals from the New Mexico Department of Public Safety Forensic Laboratory will testify. One is Jeffrey Smith, who conducted the fingerprint, also called latent analysis, determining that the only resolvable latents or finger palm prints resolved from the sword are consistent with being from Kiara. DNA analyst Rosalind Archuleta is the one who conducted the DNA testing on multiple items, including Kiara's clothing, the sword, swabs obtained from the scene, and other pieces of evidence. She will testify in essence that the blood on the sword is Grace's, and that the primary profile that can be resolved from the sword is Kiara's. Again, this is not surprising, as Kiara is the primary person that handled that sword, and she cut her hands during the murder, leaving some of her own DNA behind. Sergeant Vigil is our third to last witness. You heard us refer to him as the case agent. He is the one who worked this case from start until today. He's the one who evidence flows to and through in putting the whole picture together. As I stated, he interviewed Isaac Apodaca and Kiara McCulley at the police station while the crime scene was being processed. He interviewed Isaac first. Isaac was again Mirandized. You will see the Miranda waiver form, waiving his rights and agreeing to speak to Sergeant Vigil. He begins the interview, Isaac, by telling a lengthy series of stories about how Kiara was being violent and creepy and using a butterfly knife that was never recovered, and that she basically did all of the murdering by herself on her own free will. After a long series of stories, Sergeant Vigil realizes the phones are involved, and he decides to go through Isaac's phone with him, and he obtains permission from Isaac to do so. And it's during the review of those messages that the case, as it relates to Isaac, breaks wide open. The evidence shows that Isaac wasn't just aware of the plan to murder Grace. He was actively participating in conversations about it for hours and hours. Isaac initially denies sending those messages, or then admits to portions but not others, but then he ultimately admits that he sent the messages. And he even acknowledges that he wanted Kiara to kill Grace. The interview will be yours to watch, and you can see for yourself how Isaac tangled himself up in multiple lies. Sergeant Vigil then interviewed Kiara. Now, Kiara is not in trial in this case, and therefore her interview is not going to be admissible evidence, so you won't see that play through. But you will hear her testify, and she will acknowledge that during her interview with Sergeant Vigil, she denied knowing what happened.
Let me approach. Come on up. You may continue, counsel.
Thank you, Judge. So as I stated, Kiara will acknowledge that during her interview with Sergeant Vigil, she denied remembering or knowing exactly what had happened to Grace. So at this point in his very early investigation, Sergeant Vigil had overwhelming amounts of evidence. He had a lot of evidence that Grace was murdered, that Kiara had murdered Grace, and that Isaac had made statements implicating himself via those messages and other actions. But his investigation did not end with those interviews. In the months, days, weeks that followed, he secured search warrants for the devices that were collected, including ones that ended up not being relevant or even were blank. He interviewed Lanny McCulley, Linda Montoya. He reviewed test results, phone extractions, listened to recorded phone calls. He will review many and most of those data points with you during his testimony to show you how he was able to make the links between Isaac's Facebook accounts and Isaac's phone that he used to send the messages to Kiara. Even as late as 2025, Sergeant Vigil continued to work the case, working with experts to locate witnesses that could have some additional information or collateral information. Sergeant Vigil is the individual that will put everything sort of together and show how he's reconstructed things to lay out the process and the planning of the murder through Isaac's own digital communications. Finally, you'll hear from our last two witnesses that the state will call of the 1920, Kiara McCulley and Dr. Michael Wellner. Now, Kiara has pleaded guilty to aggravated second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. And this may not reflect the full scope of the crime she committed. This is a bargained for exchange that allowed her to plead to a lesser charge in exchange for her testimony and cooperation. In other words, Kiara no longer enjoys the right to remain silent, and she no longer enjoys the right to freedom, nor will she for a long time. Her plea requires truthful cooperation, and she faces additional penalties and potential charges if she fails or refuses to testify truthfully. This means that Kiara will need to sit in court and detail the murder of Grace. She will need to be confronted with prior inconsistent statements. She's been interviewed several times by law enforcement, even by Isaac's own attorneys. She will have to lay it all out there. We expect the evidence to show that Kiara has a very difficult time distinguishing between her very complicated feelings about Grace and the delusions that played into the long-standing and very public murder plot. She will acknowledge the messages using the sword and also acknowledge the confusion of finding out that Isaac had not, in fact, stayed behind to help clean up while she showered, like they'd discussed, but instead he'd fled the scene, called his mom, who then called 911. Kiara may come across as strange, unlikable, disturbed, profoundly broken. But she may also come across as someone who would do a lot of things for love. Our final witness will be Dr. Michael Wellner. We expect both him and Kiara to testify on Monday. He is a nationally renowned forensic psychiatrist who has published, researched, taught, and testified in the field of forensic psychiatry for 30 years. He has reviewed the evidence in this case, including background information of the parties, and he's even conducted some of his own interviews of civilian witnesses. And his testimony, ladies and gentlemen, will help answer the question of how someone can help, encourage, or even cause their partner to commit a violent murder. Because ultimately, that's what the evidence in this case is expected to show. The state of New Mexico expects that the evidence will show that Isaac Apodaca incited and instigated this murder. The evidence will demonstrate that it wasn't impulsive or a split-second decision, and it was a deliberate plan. And at the end of all of this evidence, we will ask you to return guilty verdicts for first-degree, willfully and deliberately committed murder under an aided and abetted or accomplice theory, as well as conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Thank you.